in recovering democracy in South Africa. Researcher, analyst and commentator Professor Raymond Suttner uncovers the strengths and fundamental values of our democracy, and while also looking at a wide range of contentious issues that currently preoccupy South Africans. He does not leave the reader with a sense of powerlessness or pessimism, which is quite rare in South Africa today. But in our weekly book slot, well, the author, Professor Suttner, joins us in studio to talk a little bit more about recovering democracy in South Africa. Good morning, Professor.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Fantastic to have you here. Not your first book. I want to first talk about yourself a little bit to sort of set the scene.
Yes.
You were jailed, I understand, for underground activities as an ANC operative back in the day. You wrote about that. Just tell us a little bit more about yourself as the author and how your past has inspired your latest work.
Well, I was in jail twice and house arrest for about 11 years in total. But I've also been an academic, so I've tried to always make sense of what is going on, and to have, when I write a book or an article, I always have an agenda in mind. I try to empower the reader to understand, because I think what we have in South Africa is people look at something and they say, oh, this is so depressing, I am very distressed. And I've tried to speak to those types of readers and provide explanations. So I've addressed questions like our constitution, the type of democracy that we've got, questions of leadership. What type of leadership do we need? What is ethical leadership? What does it mean to behave in a manner that people can take as a role model? And I've also looked at history, at Mandela's legacies, and I've tried to interpret them, I think, slightly differently from simply saying he's an icon. I've looked at Chief Luthuli and other people.
There's often negative sentiment, and in my opinion, a lot of it is driven through our media here in South Africa. Do we have a healthy state of affairs right now? How do you view it within the context of your work?
Well, I feel there's a lot of reason for concern over the level of violence in this country, the various types of violence. There is state violence of a range of types, which I think is not adequately regulated and measured. Secondly, there is violence between people. We have a macho culture in this country where mainly men don't try to resolve problems through discussion. They just club someone. You know, if someone is looking at you, they say, why are you looking at me that way? And they just club. And they club their partners. And there's a lot of gender-based violence and sexually based violence. And I feel that the media is actually not giving it sufficient attention, and this is an attention that needs to take into account that it's mainly men. And we have to look at the models of manhood that we have in South Africa today.
Is it a lot of our problems we have in education alike, is it around parenting and around father figures not being in the house?
It is partly around that, but it's a question of what type of relationships we see as appropriate between men and women. And when we look at the television screen, the imagery of masculine heroes, are those masculine heroes actually assisting us to make young boys model themselves on people who will be gentle? The idea of manhood shouldn't be just rough, tough. It should also be gentle, tender, and concerned about others. Concerned
about others and empathy for others. I want to ask you the question because we're dealing today with quite tough issues here in South Africa. We're dealing with attacks on foreign nationals, which some quarters people call it xenophobia. In other areas, it's not xenophobia. We've had a discussion around that. I'm sure you must have listened into some of that. How do you view that? And then also, how do you view other types of protests that we see around the country?
You see, I think it's very important to go back to why we wanted freedom in South Africa. Freedom is not something just for the black people of South Africa, just for the white people of South Africa. We fought against it being for the white people of South Africa. It is a universal, indivisible freedom. And what is now happening with these attacks on foreigners is that we are really spitting on the conception of freedom that was inaugurated in 1994, that no human being would be treated without proper dignity. No human being would be subject to violence, whether they come from Somalia, Pakistan, Ethiopia, whatever it happens to be. So I feel that this is very concerning and we need to address it. Now, when you also refer to people burning down schools, things like this, now, when people are living in conditions that are dehumanized, with sewerage running in the streets, you know, they say absolute power corrupts absolutely, but absolute powerlessness also has a demoralizing effect and sometimes leads to these outrages, like the burning of libraries, schools, health clinics, things like that.
Now, in your book, the thing that stands out for me, because I'm always looking at solutions rather than just problems.
Yes.
Talk about self-empowerment.
Yes.
Is this the key for us in panel beating a way forward for us?
Well, I don't think we can panel beat, because panel beat is quick. What I believe is that we've got to try and identify the problem. And the problem for me is to defend our constitutional rights and to defend legality. And there are a lot of people who are interested in doing that. People from faith-based organizations, sections of business, workers, civic people. We need to all join together and say, we want the democratic gains of 1994 to be safeguarded and fully restored and build our South Africa on that basis.
Well, I thank you for joining us today, Professor Suttner. We've got some breaking news, so I've got a cut to that. It's a topic quite close to my heart and something that we could continue talking about for some time to come. But thank you for joining us today and giving us an insight into a book that most of us here in South Africa should have a look at. It's called Recovering Democracy in South Africa, and it's written by Professor Raymond Suttner. Now for the break.